Hello, and welcome to the Think Twice podcast. I'm Jordan Yule.
And I'm Jacob Schreiner-Briggs. So today, Jordan and I were fortunate enough to have been joined by Javier Munoz, the current star of Hamilton the Musical. And initially we had planned to do another funny cold open with one of the tracks. We were going to be creative, and then we had the conversation, and it just left both of us, kind of with our jaws on the floor, and just kind of in awe of the power of the conversation and of Javier's passion and elements of his story. So instead of going for that at that point tone deaf sort of comedic open, we just wanted to briefly advise you to listen to the entirety of the following conversation because of how powerful it was.
Yeah, the topic we went into the episode with was the intersect of activism and art, and we did address those topics and how he uses his role as Alexander Hamilton and how he engages with different social and political causes outside of the theater to advocate for perhaps marginalized communities. And what we had was one of the most emotional and raw and touching discussions to date on this show. So we really cannot overstate how fantastic and rewarding this conversation was. So we really hope you enjoy this.
We fought with him. Me, I died for him. Me, I trusted him.
Me, I loved him.
And me, I'm the damn fool that shot him.
There's a million things I haven't done, but just to pay.
What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton.
So today we are joined by Javier Munoz, the star of the critically acclaimed Broadway musical Hamilton. Javier,
good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
We are so excited. I know Jake he's probably jumping out of his seat right now.
Yeah, I'll try not to fanboy too hard throughout the I'll keep it contained. Okay.
Awesome.
So Javier, we're talking to you today about your experience in this show and how your performance intersects with your work as an activist, and even in a broader sense, how art and performers and artists inspire and oftentimes lead social and political movements. But before we get there, we've got questions from admiring fans. We had so many people wanting to tell you how much they appreciate you and appreciate the show. And Scott and Natalie have asked, what is the most musically challenging part of Hamilton?
Honestly, it's at the very beginning, and Lynn and I used to talk about this all the time. It's my shot.
Take a shot, and I am not throwing away my shot.
And the challenge with my shot is, first of all, it's an epically long number, and there's just so many words crammed into that for Hamilton. But it's a number that's so it's so hot, and it's so thrilling, and it's so highly charged and high energy, and it's meant to be that. The hard part is not to let it take you and let it sort of let yourself get carried away. It's the third number in the show, and you've got like 3 more hours to go. So if you let yourself as the performer just immerse yourself in it and get carried away with the momentum, you're going to blow your voice and your body, and you've just started the show. And so it's a really careful balance between what you want the number to be, what the number needs to be, getting all the words and the ideas out coherently, and really, it's where I think it's the marriage between, or the sort of what seals the deal between the performers and the audience. That number says, this is what your ears are going to hear, and this is what we're going to show you, what it's going to look like. This is our physical vocabulary, and so now you, audience, please agree to say yes to how we're going to tell the story. and if, of course the audience can't help but say yes. It's such a thrilling number, but it's sort of what seals the deal between audience and performer, that this is how we're going to explain this story, and it's going to go this fast, and it's going to sound like this, and the audience says yes, and so it really has to be clear, and just try not to get carried away with it, because you really can just put all the energy that's been building up to that night's performance can be blown in that particular number. So that to me is absolutely the most challenging.
When I saw it a couple weeks ago, I think that song and the opening number, Alexander Hamilton, were just it left me with chills. I mean, the audience just went nuts, and I can't imagine what it must be, how it must feel to be on the receiving end of that type of applause. I mean, there was just so much energy in that small theater. It was incredible. So I could, it's got to feel incredible.
It is. It totally is. That's what I mean when I say it's like the deal maker is at the end of that number. There should be that kind of response from the audience. And I've never experienced a performance where there wasn't, but that's the sort of stamp on the envelope that says, okay, now we're ready to mail this letter. Like the audience is with us, we're with you, and the conversation has truly, truly begun. And it's always that thrilling. And honestly, as a performer, we all on that stage need to hear the audience in that moment to know, yes, you're with us. And so it's the deal maker.
So it seems like there's a lot of pressure then in that number to strike the balance that you're talking about between, capturing the intensity of the character in that moment, but then also not going over the top so that you set yourself behind for the rest of the show, and like you pace yourself.
Yes.
You go too hard too early, essentially.
Yes, and you're totally right. It is a lot. Is a lot of responsibility, and it's a lot of work. It's like one of the few times where a lot of the time, when I feel like when actors or artists or performers talk about technique, as far as acting and singing go, that's one of those numbers and performances that continuously every night has to be all technique. You just have to have your head straight and your mind focused and very present to make sure that you're just executing and doing what needs to be done, but not completely wrecking yourself so that, come intermission, you're calling out of the show, Yeah.
So with that pressure and just the pressure of the show in general, what was it like performing in front of President Obama, especially considering from everything I've read and seen, it seems like you were kind of expecting that Lin would be performing. So what was that whole situation like? How did it develop, and how was the experience knowing that he was in the audience?
That is still mind-boggling to me. Like, it's one of those moments in life where you go, did that really happen? And was I really there? Did that really, it really is. But I was scheduled, that was during our preview process. And previews for a Broadway show is, of course, the time where audiences are first sort of getting to see. It's the beginnings of what the conversation is going to be in that theater with this story. And so we get to hear and feel audience response, and audience gets to start buzzing about it. And so it's still a time of development for the piece. And it's also a period where musically and choreographically and directorially, the creatives get to still make changes night to night to sort of fine tune the performance as to how they see audiences reacting or not reacting to it. And so I was scheduled to perform 3 performances during previews so that Lin could sit out as composer and creator, see his piece, and make any changes he wanted to make. My very first preview performance in that theater, on that stage, was for President Obama. Oh, so my first show was for our president.
High stakes.
Yeah. And it was nuts, But I remember getting the call from Tommy, our director, and he asked me to come in early. I happened to already be coming in early. And so I get to the theater, and he and Lin are sitting in the house. They call me over. I sit down, and Tommy's explaining to me that the president is going to come and see the show. And it happens to be on the performance that was meant to be my first performance. My mind immediately went to, okay, so then Lin's going to do this, and I'll just do the last 2. And I was, in my head, I was really disappointed. And as he's talking, he says, "And we want you to do the performance." And I wasn't sure that I heard him correctly. And so I literally said, "I'm sorry." And Lin just turned to me and went, "And you're going to be great." And that was the deal, was sealed. I was going to do that performance. And then they announced it to the cast. They just wanted to tell me first so I could go somewhere in the building and piss my shorts for a bit and, and then come back and have composure when they told the cast. So it was very gracious of them in all ways, and generous of Lin to let me do that. And extraordinary, that performance, thrilling just because it was thrilling in and of itself, because it was my first performance. Add on to the fact that we had, a month of Secret Service at the theater to make sure things were secure. They were surveilling everything, and just, the thrill of the audience, the electricity in the audience, knowing that the president was there and they were here to see the show. And there was already electricity just because of the buzz that was being created around Hamilton. But then you had the president there, and forget it. That audience was on fire. And really, the only way I could get through it was to stay focused on the fact that Lin was there to see his show. He had 3 opportunities to see his show before we were officially open. And so my actual job and responsibility was to tell the story as clearly and as best as I could for Lin. And so actually Lin was my focus for that entire performance. And I slept fine the night before, and I got through it, and the performance was just on fire in all aspects. And then that night when I got home, I sat up in bed all night, just eyes wide open, like, what just happened?
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So on that note, segueing into the political side of it. So of course, President Obama went and saw the show. But then we have, Vice President Pence went and saw the show, and we'll talk about that and
yes.
What happened with the show and the implications for activism. But so I guess starting generally first, and this is another question from Scott and Natalie. So you as an individual, do you see yourself as someone who is just naturally socially active, or do you feel that there's some sort of duty or responsibility to be active because of the cultural and political popularity and significance of the show, or is it a bit of both? I mean, how do you shape your activism in the context of Hamilton?
It's unique, to be honest. And I'll tell a little backstory here. My very first job, professionally, I signed with my first agent at the age of 17, and my very first gig that I booked was for an organization that was doing a sort of backers audition for a piece. Backers auditions are workshops that are looking for producers to further the project. And so that was their for-profit organization, but tied to their production company was a not-for-profit that used theater to teach literacy and after-school programs in New York City. And we bonded really quickly, and they took a liking to me, and so they hired me for their not-for-profit. And so I started my very first sort of exposure professionally in this business to the power of theater was in that literacy program. So going to after-school programs and using art to teach literacy, using art to teach English, and it was extraordinary, the work that took place in these little tiny after-school centers, and the kind of education that happened when you took the textbook out of the child's hand and put a script in their hand, and language became creative and fun, and there was genuine comprehension happening, and so it was astounding to me. I was 17, 18 at that time. That made a huge impression on me. The power of art beyond entertainment. And that inspired me further. When I went to NYU, I went to Tisch. I got involved in a lot of programs that did just that. The AmeriCorps program under the Clinton administration existed at that time, and the only arts division of that program was at Tisch. And so there was 2 representatives per medium. So there was like 2 acting students, 2 photography students, and then I think there were I want to say the other department was either, I don't want to say it was dance, but forgive me, it's been a few decades. but but it was basically, you had to audition for the program, and so I was chosen, me and another student from the acting program, to be part of that AmeriCorps program, and that not only helped pay for my tuition, but it again exposed me to the power of art outside of entertainment. I worked in centers that desperately needed arts programs to reach their students or reach the population there to use in all sorts of ways, and the power of creativity, the freedom that it brings into a space, the sort of ease that it brings into people, and makes them accessible to ideas and to conversation, and suddenly you can engage people in ways that you couldn't do if it was some sort of formal seminar or class, because that feels so very structured and regimented, whereas art is chaotic, and in that chaos it's just freedom, and so yes, there is a structure to the art, but I would always leave my classes and have everyone take off their shoes. No one sat in like school chairs. We cleared everything. Everyone sat on the floor, and it was while it was in the classroom, it was breaking the structure of what these students were in every day, and it sort of freed them up. And suddenly that made them accessible and more creative, and then they start bonding with each other because their walls are down, right? So then suddenly they're able to be more themselves, and within that, whatever we were working on and creating together became a group effort. And so people who would normally not ever engage with each other were becoming friends. And so that witnessing the power of art in that way influenced me greatly. And I ended up graduating with, there's always awards at the end of each graduating term, year, whatever. And I received the Community Service Award. And that, I remember receiving that award and thinking, I don't know if I'm ever going to use this again, but like it never stopped being something that I did. And so the power of art as community service is something that is ingrained in me already. And add to that Hamilton, no matter when Hamilton would have been produced, it would have been relevant. The ideas, I think, are universal as far as we're always striving for these freedoms. We're always striving for the balance of equality in our society. There's never a time we're not, right? Maybe there are times where we feel like we've reached a balance and we can sit back a little bit and enjoy it. But there's always still something to engage and fight for, some sort of inequality to stand up for, some cause to bring attention to, visibility to, and so Hamilton, I feel, would have been relevant no matter when it was produced. It happened to be produced at a time where it's such a turbulent time. It's such an upheaval, and we're absolutely digging to the depths of the soil and tilling really deep now, and digging up all of the truths, and everyone's really being unmasked, and we're all seeing each other exactly as we are, and as painful and difficult as that is, it's absolutely necessary in order to move forward. You can't avoid the mountain in this path, right? We have to climb it. And I feel like the opportunity, it's like the perfect marriage. I'm already someone who's engaged in community service and social causes and being active. And then I happen to be fortunate enough to be in Hamilton and to have that platform as well. And so it really is a bit of both. And whether I had Hamilton or not, I'd still be finding ways to be as active as I can. But because of Hamilton, it does enable me to have a greater reach, to hopefully spread the more, I try to spread as much positivity as I can. Of course, not everyone's always going to agree with me, and that's okay. But it's given me that platform to help bring visibility to things, and I'm so grateful for that. And certainly, it started before Hamilton. It exists now, and and that kind of activism will exist beyond Hamilton as well.
Awesome. So Rachel Eishorn, who actually introduced Hamilton to my girlfriend and me a couple years ago,
Awesome.
She asks, she says, Hamilton demonstrates a powerful underlying theme of acceptance in the way that it highlights that Hamilton and Lafayette were immigrants, how it casts people of color to depict what has been a white-dominated history, and in the way the cast addressed Vice President Pence directly when he attended the musical. So how do you and other artists ensure their messaging extends beyond the walls of the theater to make a lasting change?
Well, I feel like, yes, I agree with everything that was just said there, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud when we start that, we start that show, and I come out and those first lines of Alexander Hamilton and that whole number, we're just standing. There's not a lot of choreography at the very, very top. We're just showing you this is who you're going to see tell this story, and in that diversity, I constantly feel empowered by that. It's an interesting thing, though. There are people who are going to audiences that come to see the show that will get that right away and will interpret that right away, and it'll resonate with them. And then there are audiences who, and I don't mean this to be insulting, but there are audiences who sort of need to be more spoon fed a bit, and that's a product of entertainment that doesn't ask audiences to think very much, and so this does ask you to think very much. And so in order to, I feel, have a greater reach to as many people as possible, on top of just performing, if we want those messages to be conveyed and heard, then it's up to us as individual artists to add on to that, right? We have the power of social media to highlight articles that may resonate with the messages we're trying to help support, or in our own words, post things and images that support the ideas and causes that we're trying to bring visibility to. So I think in and of itself, the show has incredible presence in making so many statements, in empowering women, in the diversity of the casting, in all those ways. I mean, I find it, I've always loved the idea of our period costumes, but it's our own hair, right? That combination of things is in and of itself is really powerful. So I guess it's sort of, we could sit back on our laurels and just say, here's the show and it speaks for itself, but we have an opportunity to also speak beyond that. And I think that is something we as a cast and as a show as a whole have to be very mindful of and responsible with, and as careful as we can to make the messaging, if we do choose to engage in that kind of messaging, be positive and engaging. But it's certainly, I think, an individual choice, and the show itself is powerful and has a powerful message on so many fronts. But I think to reach as a greater audience and bring more people to the table, it does mean that we as individual artists can sort of add on to that. But I got to say, as an example, I've never received more appreciation from audiences when I receive messages from fellow LGBTQIA folks in the community who will say things to me like, I never knew I needed that kind of representation, because I'm very out about everything. And that's how I choose to live. And that, when I receive those messages, that's huge to me, that there's some young person somewhere who sees me in this role and in this show, and it encourages them to be, self-loving and find their self-worth, and encourage them to pursue their dreams and their goals, and to not let any of the language that's out there that wants to keep them small make them small, or diminish them in any way. That's huge. So I think, yeah, in and of itself, the show speaks volumes, but I personally like to add on to that, to encourage certain messages, like, encouraging and inspiring fellow LGBTQIA folks to be proud and to feel good in their skin.
So I really do think that probably answers the next question, which I think places the previous one in a more specific context. So this one's coming from my good friend Kelly Rantilla, and so she's referring specifically to November of last year, where Brandon Victor Dixon addresses the then Vice President-elect Mike Pence after the show, and essentially, explains that the play is representing a diverse America, and that there are fears that the incoming administration would not protect them, the planet, their children, their parents, and so on. And so there was an actual direct addressing of the vice president and the fears that were associated with the incoming administration. So Kelly's question, which again I think you spoke to, is it preferable to let the art speak for itself, or was that threat then enough of an underlying justification? But I think because you kind of already answered your opinion on, whether or not you let art speak for itself or adding to it, then maybe instead, if you would just generally reflect on that moment and what made it important for you and the impacts of it, and just, whatever you have to say about it for the people listening.
Absolutely. That was a profound night, and it was a very passionate night for us as a show. And I want to say that there's always an honor to perform for a dignitary, whether it's from our own country or another nation. That's not a small thing for a politician to come and spend time with us and see this show and hear this story. Is really, really a powerful and beautiful thing. We sort of think, I always think of theater as just sort of the average person coming for the entertainment, but to have the members of our audience be politicians is really profound and incredible. And I was actually quite, I got to say, all I'm going to sort of reflect on all the aspects of the very sort of diverse reactions I had to that night. First and foremost, I was sort of impressed that he was there. It should be recognized that he wanted to be there and hear the story, and the story doesn't necessarily support all that he politically believes in and stands for, and I think that's pretty awesome that he still chose to be there and was there with his family. In fact, it's the kind of it reminds me of the kind of relationship I have with my own family, where my family's very conservative, and I, of course, am not. So, but there's room, right? There's room for conversation there. They're still my family. We can still talk about things and support each other. And so I was actually genuinely impressed, and I thought it should be noted he wanted to be there. He was there. He saw the show. He stayed throughout the whole thing, and that's pretty fantastic. But also, then to get more specific, his personal politics specifically towards LGBTQIA community, I don't agree with in any way whatsoever, and that should not be a surprise to anyone. And that's my own individual, personal point of view. I'm not speaking for the show; I'm speaking for me, and so that was difficult for me to reconcile in the moment. But very quickly, I saw it as an opportunity. I saw it as an opportunity to be excellent, to show excellence in front of this person who thinks I deserve electric shock treatment for being gay. And I saw it as an opportunity to be my best, and not only for him as an audience member, but to him as a gay man. And so it really, I was on fire for that performance. I gave it my absolute all, as did this cast, and it took leadership. A lot of folks in the cast felt at odds with performing for him, and so it took some leadership to sort of inspire everyone to see this as an opportunity to just be great, and that's what we did. And it was very much, the question was posed: do we say something? Do we not? And who delivers that message? And it was I think it was written and executed with great dignity, and it was not at all confrontational, in my opinion. I do believe it was a very elegantly worded message, and I think it spoke for a lot of people. And certainly, it was not. Those fears were not random or made up or imaginary. We are now witnessing exactly what we spoke to in that message. We are witnessing those things happen. Attacks on communities and members of our nation, of our country, people in our fellow citizens being singled out in ways that we were afraid of back then, and that's what we were speaking to. We were fearful that this would happen, and we're now witnessing it happening. So it's not like our fears were unfounded. It's not like us wanting to speak on that was random or selfish. It was foresight, and I believe, and here we are now witnessing it. So it's validated, in my opinion.
And Vice President-elect Pence, I see you walking out, but I hope you will hear us just a few more moments. There's nothing to boo here, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing to boo here. We're all here sharing a story of love. We have a message for you, sir. We hope that you will hear us out. And I encourage everybody to pull out your phones and tweet and post, because this message needs to be spread far and wide, okay? Vice President-elect Pence, we welcome you, and we truly thank you for joining us here at Hamilton, an American Musical. We really do. We, sir, we are the diverse America who are alarmed and anxious that your new administration will not protect us, our planet, our children, our parents, or defend us and uphold our inalienable rights, sir. But we truly hope that this show has inspired you to uphold our American values and to work on behalf of all of us. All of us. Again, we truly thank you for sharing this show, this wonderful American story told by a diverse group of men, women of different colors, creeds, and orientations.
And it was a difficult night. It was a difficult night. There were so many conflicting feelings. But I also want to praise his response after. I thought how he phrased his reaction to the audience and to us was really quite wonderful and positive. And it sort of felt like, whether it was genuine or not is not what I'm talking about. I'm definitely just saying how his actual response left the door open to conversation, and I think that's the kind of stuff we need, right? We need the conversations to happen, and the important conversations to happen. So it was a really potent, powerful night, one that I won't forget for the rest of my life. But that's that's sort of the power and beauty of art. Art really can break down walls and ask us to engage with each other in ways that we may never have another opportunity to do. If we start having political debates, it gets heated. If we start having, those conversations, those have the possibility of getting heated too. And so many other forms of meeting have lend themselves to not really listening to each other. And I feel like art breaks that down. And we really sort of let our guard down in the process of creating or engaging with art and through art that allows us to really see one another in a way that we might not in any other medium or form. So I'm actually, as difficult and as turbulent and as emotional as that night was, I'm grateful it happened. I'm grateful he came. I'm grateful he sat through the entire show. I'm grateful he listened to our message, and I'm grateful for his response. And I think positive things came from it, even if folks were so angry and blindly angry. I got messages. I got so much hate mail and hate speech. I got hate mail sent to the theater, most of which were accusing me of being wrong for giving the speech, to which I had to say to myself, did you watch the video? Because I'm actually standing behind the guy giving the speech. So let's just talk about that, right? So a lot of that anger was angry for the sake of being angry, not even actually informed anger. But it was worth sort of upsetting, the waters. I feel, because what came of it is really all positive to me, I think.
So who are your inspirations? Like, who growing up inspired you that you saw at the intersect of art and activism?
God, so many people. Oh, I mean, I have to say, like, I know I'm going to bring her up, and I know a lot of people very, very have very strong opinions about her. But she's an artist who I grew up with, who as a kid, and when it came to pop music, kids are drawn to pop music. She had a great hook in all of her songs, and I sang them all the time. But I started to see what it meant to sort of marry a political message to even pop music. And it was a bunch of artists, but I would say Madonna and the Eurythmics were two really strong icons who, and I mean Annie Lennox specifically, they're strong icons of imagery that was provocative and demanded conversation about it. And I mean, and that's like early on. I was quite young when that started to sort of process in my brain that you could have messages. Bands like REM and B-52s spoke to me in that exact way. And then, cut to Pearl Jam and Nirvana and these strong images and messages that asked us to think as well as being entertained. And then, of course, that music. I could go on. That could be a whole separate interview about the endless amount of musicians who have inspired me in that way. Patti Smith. I mean, forget it. I could go on for days. But certainly, Keith Haring is another strong influence on me. And I guess sort of really when you start getting into more the realm of politics, Peter Gabriel was one of the first to me at my age. I of course know of all the artists that came before my time that I of course listened to and was inspired by, but to be alive at the time when the artist is doing the art that they're doing is what I'm trying to sort of stick to. And Peter Gabriel was one of the stronger influences, bringing light through his music and through his art to causes that I just didn't even know about. I wasn't learning about in school, and I was learning through his work. And that was he's very much a profound influence. And then come books and authors and speakers and I've got. I mean, really, I think I have to say one of the more. I'm so grateful for coming across his work as Bilal. Theater of the Oppressed is a book that I treasure, and I mean, talk about under the most extreme circumstances and creating art that was so rebellious and passionate and just literally born from a desire to create change. And I certainly don't think I have the courage to do that kind of work, but it does influence me a great deal. I mean, that's just a few, but my bookshelves are packed. My music collection is packed. It's visual artists. I have books on them too. It's just, it never ends. There's always another artist somewhere who's doing or saying something that I gravitate to and just say, wow, that's a message I'm picking up on, and I'm going to devour that and digest that for a bit. So yeah, that's like a handful in the sea of influences.
So transitioning from the intersect of art and activism to the intersect specifically here of art and history, just as a sort of preamble to this, Hamilton the Musical is what drove me to buy Ron Chernow's book on Hamilton.
Great.
So you have that sort of crosstalk between art in a contemporary society that depicts something historical that then motivates people in that contemporary society to then re-immerse themselves.
Yes.
But then there's also the truth of asymmetry between the contemporary depiction of a human being and who they were in reality in the past. And so as I read Chernow's book, it was very illuminating in the fact that Hamilton, as depicted in the musical, is certainly all of those things that are attributed to him, that sort of drive, that hunger, the whole concept of not throwing away your shot and taking advantage of every moment that just comes through every page of the book. But then there are also some things that aren't so savory about the character of Hamilton. So I guess the objectification of women, specifically before he meets, Elizabeth Schuyler. Then of course the infidelity with Mariah Reynolds. The speech at the Constitutional Convention, where he's advocating for not a monarchy per se, but something certainly closer to it than what we have now. And of course, the question of slavery, where we know he was, for his time, certainly more on the side of abolition, but it wasn't one of his necessarily primary drivers. And he associated, of course, with slave owners, and that just blight on our history. So understanding all of that, and the sort of asymmetry sometimes that can happen, where because of the success of this musical, people now might fall into the trap of idealizing Alexander Hamilton as this archetype of purity or of whatever positive values you want to ascribe to him. What do you think about the sort of problem that poses, where some people might not go and pick up Chernow's book and get a more robust understanding, but then that rather instead they're maybe replacing a historical person who had flaws with an archetypical representation of that person in theater? Do you see that as a significant problem? And if so, how would you advise people to address it, or just, I guess, reflect upon it in general?
I do see it very much as a problem. And you're striking on something that is actually at the core of my performance and my portrayal of the character. Because I agree with that. There's this is why I love playing him so much, is he is flawed, capital letters, flawed. But that's real, right? It's the type. That's why I love this character so much. It's the portrayal of humanity. We are all flawed. We all have dark and light, and according to whatever the current popular beliefs are of social behavior, we're asked to suppress some things and accentuate others, and I mean aspects of self. So this character is exactly the kind of character I want to be playing. And what I try to do in the performance is not apologize for anything that he does that is questionable, that is on the darker side of who he is. And I can feel when the audience receives that, there's silence. And I want there to be, because I want the audience to sit there and not necessarily feel like Hamilton's your hero. He's who you're rooting for throughout the entire show, but not necessarily your hero. And that's exactly what I want. I want folks to not forget that there are aspects to him that were unsavory. And that is so human. Like, we can't build each other up to be Supermen. That's not realistic. No one exists like that. And that's a danger. And so, and that's actually at the root of why I even do what I do. I wanted to be an artist in order to portray the light and the dark, to help audiences embrace that within themselves and say, I'm capable of anything. We are capable of creation. We are capable of destruction, all of us. And that doesn't make us good or bad. That just is. And so that's at the heart of my performance, my portrayal of him. And I agree with you that if someone doesn't necessarily have access to being able to see the show and see that portrayal, or in any of the productions that exist now, because I feel like all the Hamiltons do that they sort of embody that light and dark, and not apologizing for it. And if someone doesn't have access to being able to see the show, to sort of get that extra layer, and they don't pick up the book to get that extra exposure and understanding, I just hope that there's enough conversation about that happening. Again, conversation, right? That is accessible and buzzing, because really that's at the heart of why I'm so passionate about playing this character. And I'm really actually glad you brought that up, because it's something I'm so conscious of, to not play him in a way that builds him up in that way. And that, it's there are aspects of him that are absolutely admirable as to anyone, and it's wonderful to finally have his story being told. But there are truths to it, as you've brought up, that cannot be ignored and should not be ignored, and that's vital. It's vital, and I think it's also a reflection on how we sort of see politicians and our elected officials, and how we go about judging who to vote for, and how campaigns even happen and are structured. It's to play on that aspect of us. We all want to sort of find that person that we can say, that's the perfect ideal human being that I can follow, and that person doesn't exist. That is not reality, and that's not humanity. We are light and dark. We are all capable of all those things. It's the choices we make along the way, right? That's what it comes down to. And so it's I'm really glad you brought that up, because I'm very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about making sure that's the message that gets conveyed. And I can't quite say that I have a solution to the person who can't have access or doesn't have access to actually seeing the show, but other than, I hope they hear things like this interview and other things that are happening out there, other conversations that are happening out there that sort of help break down the idea of idolizing and sort of trying to make a person be everything to you. That's just dangerous. And I love that Hamilton is so flawed. I crave that kind of character. It's real. It's so much more realistic, and speaks to the human journey, right? Like, we're all on that journey to be our best selves, and along the way, we absolutely each make mistakes, and that's real. That's a real thing, and sort of the way. I don't want people to forget that, like, Hamilton was persecuted for what he did and paid the price for what he did. I mean, historically, he was buried. We're Hamilton. This production has reawakened an awareness of him, but for centuries, he's gone very much under the radar. People didn't learn. I don't know many people who learned about him in school, and not necessarily in this way. And so it's. There was a price to pay for what he did and the choices he made, and so I hope that I just can only hope that message is also being conveyed at the same time as people are sort of gravitating to Hamilton and thinking, this is an ideal person to measure myself up to, or to see in that light of being like perfect or flawless, where he's most definitely flawed. And that's just a wonderful thing to bring up. I care very much about making sure that my portrayal of him is as true to his imperfection as he actually was.
Well, thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe a place to pivot before we wrap up. What are some of the biggest unaddressed societal and political issues today that you wish more people would engage with, start working on and addressing, and in which ways would you like people to start getting involved?
Man, there's just so many. I feel like right now we're just starting to really have some difficult but needed conversations about race in our country, and representation, positive representation, especially within the industry of entertainment, pertaining to race and to women. I feel like that's starting. So those are things I've always been passionate about, but I feel like that's got a new visibility right now that I've always wanted to see and would like to see more of. But I guess things that are sort of getting overlooked. I think I'm gonna go sort of to the heart of sort of what my messaging is and what I try to make my messaging about, and it's about the sort of tying into the last question and going a little further, the idea of illness, of disability, of and I mean the idea, not the actual conditions, the idea, the perceptions of illness and disability, and the immediate collective response that if I share that I am diabetic, if I share that I have ADD, if I share whatever the condition is, it makes me less. If I'm in a wheelchair and I want to participate in this thing, no one's thinking of me and considering that I might want to participate in this thing and how to make it happen. I think that the idea that there's any sort of imperfection in a person makes them less is something I want to see addressed more. You know, it's and it's something I know personally. It's not only being Latino in this country and in this industry and the sort of the box I get put into when I go to auditions, and whether they know me or not, they just see my name, and so I'm asked to audition for thug number 1 or drug dealer number 2, and no, I'm not going to play either of those ever. And being gay and openly gay in this industry and in this country, and the idea of what I should and should not be. According to that, being HIV positive, being open about that, and the cruel things that I receive from people, absolutely ignorant, completely uninformed, and downright cruel, and it's astounding, and not just beyond, not just folks who are necessarily not gay, but also within my own community. It's really fascinating, but. The idea that you don't have the perfect body, you have an illness, you have a disability, that you are, your ethnicity, whatever it is, that is the different thing makes you less, is something I care very much about, and I mean globally. It's such a So it's the first time I'm being asked this question, and so I don't quite have my thoughts and words together, because I feel very vulnerable and being asked this, because this is such a personal thing to me. Mm-hmm. It just is. If I had let in my journey, if I had let the messaging that I was receiving as a young Latin artist define me, I never would be where I am today. If I had let the messaging about being Latin and gay define me, I wouldn't be where I am today. If I had let the messaging of being HIV positive get to me and define me, I wouldn't be here. I probably would be dead. I mean, with all that, there's so much negative messaging, I probably would have ended my life at some point, because it's absolutely that oppressive. And so it's that kind of messaging that I care very strongly about, and want to see change. It is insane the amount of or the way folks with whatever it is, whether it's disability, illness, ethnicity, whatever it is, sexuality, the way we're dismissed so immediately. And I'm proud of what I've accomplished in my career in life, and think about the contributions I've made along the way, and they wouldn't exist if I had let that messaging define me. And think of all the people that have that potential to be great and do great service for all of us, for communities, for neighborhoods, for families, and for the country, and are dismissed because of some aspect of them that is deemed less, and is actually not. It doesn't diminish who they are, and so it's I feel there's just a multitude of social issues and causes that I can go on and on about, but that particular idea is something I feel strongly about, and it's why I'm out about everything. It's why I'm out about my status, why I'm out about my sexuality, why I'm proud. I'm constantly proud to be Latino, and that won't ever stop, because I want that message to reach people, to say, you matter, your voice matters, and your presence matters, your life matters, and we don't do that enough. We really do not, and it's evident. It's evident in all the details. When you walk into a building, is there wheelchair access to that building? Is there? It's always in the details, and it's those fine details that speak volumes to the person who is living with the thing. And so it's something I feel strongly about. I don't know that I've expressed myself well, but if anything, that's something I would love to see more positivity about, more positive messaging and language about, and visual cues that help affirm someone. I think about. I think about the healthcare bill, and I think about the protesters and those wheelchairs, and that violent dragging away of them, and how brave of them and bold of them and strong of them to protest in that way in the first place. Look at what they had stacked against them, and they went there anyway, and they made a protest. They were not going to be silent. Like, that's strength. And that's potential, and I guarantee in their lives they're dismissed left and right because they're in those wheelchairs, and I'm saying, look at what they did in spite of all those challenges. So it's that kind of example of we universally need to change that message.
Wow. Well, I can't think of a better note to close on. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I think that's certainly just a powerful, a whole array of powerful ideas. And before we wrap, I did just want to thank you. I actually was exposed to Hamilton by a friend, Lindsay, who really, actually kind of forced it on me. I was hesitant, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I picked up the book, and I learned a lot about history in a way that I wouldn't have. And I know I've certainly turned to the content of the musical as a source of inspiration, and I have no doubts that there's an infinite number of people, who have expressed something similar to you. But I just want to take the opportunity to thank you and Lynn and everyone who contributed to the development of this, and then personally to thank you for coming on and talking about, like you said, things that make you vulnerable. But it's very easy to admire like what you're doing. And the causes that you're representing, and not just through what you do, but who you are and how willing you are to share that with the world. I mean, I'm very appreciative of it, and so thank you for giving your time.
Thank you so much. That means a lot, and thank you for having me on and allowing me to even voice all this stuff.
Yeah, it was our pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. Thanks.
Bye, Javier.
Bye, y'all.
Oh, I can't wait to see you again. It's only a matter of time. Will they tell your story? Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? Will they tell your story? Who tells your story?
Hello, and welcome to the Think Twice podcast. I'm Jordan Yule.
And I'm Jacob Schreiner Briggs.
Go.
Oh, is that me?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we just pick it up on this file?
Yeah, sure.